Hi, good afternoon, everybody. Right, so I'm Lemon from Singapore. I'm a senior editor at Reef Builders. So today I'll just give you a very short presentation on Anthias, general husbandry, how to keep them, and a little bit of a new species that we found in the Coral Sea. All right. Okay. All right. So Anthias is it's a very broad term, and although most of the Anthias that we know are from the Indo-Pacific and the warm waters of the tropical oceans, it's only in the mid-1800s that the very first Anthias was ever described, and it came from the Mediterranean Sea, and it was in the genus Anthias. Subsequently, over the years, scientists have discovered more species, and then they put them in the genus called Pseudanthias, which is the one highlighted in red. So it's the one that we're going to be talking about today. But the main family they come from is the Serranidae, and every single one of the scientific name here represents a genus. So there's about maybe 20 genera of Anthias, but the one we'll be focusing on will be in red. So Pseudanthias can be split up into three subgenera: Franzia, Myrolabrictes, and Pseudanthias sensu stricto. But for all purpose and intent, we'll be just talking about Myrolabrictes because that's where most of our fishes are found in the subgenus. Okay, so this is just a very quick, too much words, but I'll try to summarize it. It's a very quick biology on Anthias. So all Anthias, regardless of genus, are protogynous hermaphrodites. That means they all start their life as females, and then they slowly change their sex into males over time. So females are capable of sex change, but they don't change sex whenever they want. They only change sex when certain structures in their harem dictates like social cues. So they're haremic, meaning females, they live in a group, and they're being taken care of, so to speak, by a single male. And this male is dominant, and he suppresses all the other females in the group. So what happens when this male dies? The next most dominant female in the group changes sex and replaces the male. Okay? So there's a dominance, there's a caste dominance here. So males are the most dominant, followed by females, followed by initial phase females and juveniles. Okay? So as you know, it just says here, under normal circumstances, the male suppresses the females so they don't change sex unnecessarily, unless the male dies or is captured, and then it needs to replace one, and the female will start changing. Okay, so how do the males control the females from changing sex? They're very aggressive, they dominate the females. So what they do is, they chase them, they act aggressively, and they do this by changing colors, and they swim, in high speeds around the females. So you can see here, this is a female example of Pseudanthias ventralis, and this is the male. So not only are they protogynous hermaphrodites, they're also sexually dichromatic, meaning males and females are different in coloration, so it's easy to tell the sex apart. So males are more colorful generally. Here's another example, Pseudanthias parvirostris. The female is on the left and the male is on the right. So here just, how do you keep Anthias in tanks? How do you maintain them, right? This is very based on my own experience and based on anecdotal experience online. I think that there are three very important factors. The first one would be the tank mates that you keep them in. What kind of fish do you keep your Anthias with? Second would be feeding them, and the third would be flow. So in the first section we talk about tank mates. So how many Anthias do you keep and what kind of fish do you keep them with? So remember we're saying that Anthias are very haremic in the wild. They live in big groups, multiple females, single males. So, but it's not always it's not a pretty picture. It's actually very chaotic. It's a struggle to maintain dominance. The male is always, suppressing the females from changing sex, and at the same time, the females are suppressing the juveniles from, overtaking them in the structure. It's a haremic society. It's a hierarchy, okay, so to speak. So, and depending on the species, there are some that are very aggressive, and there are some that are not aggressive. So what you want to do when you keep the Anthias in your tank is how many you should keep and what kind of species you should keep them with. So if you want to keep like a nice SPS tank with many Anthias, try to choose species that are not so aggressive, like Pseudanthias lori, for example, and try to conceive in your mind the group composition that you want to keep them with. So not every species does best in groups, although in the wild they're found in big groups. Not every species are so densely found in groups, right? Try to maintain a skewed ratio of males versus females. Remember, don't overcrowd the tank with too many males because males are found in the wild, very rarely, 1 or 2 per every 8 or 9 females, for example. So start with many females, keep maybe 1 male. Okay, and the bigger your aquarium, the better. Give them more space and feeding as well. So feeding can help suppress aggression. It's like the cichlid mentality for freshwater fish. Some people, they overcrowd their tank with a lot of cichlids so that they don't act aggressively amongst each other. So these are all just factors that you can try to remember when you want to reduce the suppress the aggression of Anthias, and so this is for the Anthias itself when you want to keep them in the tank. So I'll talk a little bit more about other species to mix them with. So here are just some examples of Anthias changing colors. Remember when I was saying the males, when they get aggressive, when they want to suppress the females from changing sex, or when they want to fight other species, they can change their color. So this is Studentus rendeli in normal coloration, and on the right showing nuptial or aggression coloration. So Studentus cooperi. This is Orulentus. And so you can see actually when they're more aggressive, when they're showing a nuptial coloration, they're more beautiful. Like for example, this species, you can see change coloration in the body, the tail, the ventral fins, and this development of extra coloration. All right. So what kind of tank mates you should keep your Studentias in? Anthias are actually very social and they're very active. In the wild, they're found in big groups. They mingle with other fish in the reef, and they can be very shy initially. So what you want to do is add something called a dither fish. So smaller fish that help to make your Anthias feel more at home, make them want to come out more. So you can put smaller fish like chromis, cerilabras, parakilinus. All these are small little wrasses or damsels that can help initially help your Anthias overcome the initial stage of scarediness. So they tend to come out more when you have smaller little fish that go around. And remember, before I was talking about keeping a lot of Anthias together, what you can do in the wild is they like to mix together with other species. So if you have Anthias that are sympatric in the wild, sympatric meaning they're found in the same range, you can mix the species together, like maybe dispar and tuca, for example. So I have a video here for you of a tank that is actually full of Anthias. It's a very nice video. It's one of my favorite tanks. It's a tank in Thailand. And this tank is basically maybe there's 6 or 7 species of Anthias. And they're all, you can see, during feeding, they're all aggressively feeding, but they're not chasing each other for food. So this is one of the methods of suppressing aggression, is to mix a lot of species together. But it can be tricky. I'll play it again. It can be tricky because, oops, sorry. Yeah, it can be tricky, especially if you have issues with bioload. And don't forget to make sure that the numbers of females and males are disparate, meaning more females and less males, so they don't kill each other and try to overtake. Oh, another thing is don't mix too many males together, because males are very dominant against each other. Putting 10 males together, the males will start killing each other one by one. So start with more females. Okay, sorry about that. All right. So tank mates. So now you know briefly how many Anthias you should keep, how you should keep them, and what kind of other fish you should keep. So small, non-aggressive fish, help them to come out, be less shy. So that's the first main important factor on keeping Anthias. Second will be feeding. Okay, so a lot of Anthias, they look very pretty in the wild, they look very nice in the shops, but you have trouble feeding them at home. They don't eat when you feed them. Why is that so? Okay, Anthias are actually very, very high. They have very high metabolic rates. In the wild, they're constantly swimming, they're constantly fighting the currents, so they need to be very fed very often, and they need to be fed with very suitable foods. And to get your Anthias to eat, how do you entice them to start feeding? There are a few factors. So the tank mates can influence that, the suitability of foods, the frequency, and the flow. So obviously, if you keep Anthias with very boisterous fish, the tank mates, like you keep them with big triggers and big angels, they're going to be very scared. They're going to be outcompeted for food. So don't keep them with too many aggressive bellicose fish, number one. A peaceful but active community tank is the best. They like a lot of action, they like a lot of activity, but they don't like it from too much big fish. So keep it small, keep it easy, keep it simple, and they just start feeding well. So some examples of Studentus, dispar and tuca. Another thing is suitability of foods. A lot of people, when they get Anthias in their tank directly, they just feed them pellets or flake food and stuff like that. They're not going to eat immediately. you have to try and start getting them on a diet first and start weaning them onto food. So Anthias in the wild, they're planktivorous. That means they swim in the water, open column, and they feed on small floating particles, maybe zooplankton and whatever, So in the beginning, you can try small foods like Artemia, cyclopes, frozen mysis, brine shrimp, to start getting them to eat. And flow is important, but I'll talk more on that later. So what I normally do for my Anthias at home is when I get Anthias straight from the fish shop, they don't eat, right? So what I normally do is I get a frozen shrimp, and you grate it very finely on a microplane. And this will produce very, very fine shavings of seafood like this. And when you put it in the water, it turns on the wave and it starts blowing around, and it kind of simulates like marine snow, like phytoplankton in the wild, and the Anthias will start. You get a good response. So initially, you might need to start with frozen seafood, but make sure it's grated as fine as possible. And then as you go along, you can start adjusting the diet, start introducing dry food, and then start getting them to change the diet. So and after that, what I normally do is I use really, really small pellets, but the same size as the frozen shrimp, the grated shrimp. So you can see this is just a coin, like a 16 mm coin, and the pellets on the left, just to get a size comparison. They're really, really small. So get them feeding on frozen food first, and then slowly adjust their diet, add in pellets, add in flake of the same size, and eventually you get them feeding aggressively, like the video I showed you before, on dry food. Okay. So yeah, I mentioned this before, and so here is a picture of a Studentis with the mouth open. So before this, I was mentioning that they are strictly planktivorous, meaning they feed from the water column. The shape of their mouth is not adapted for picking food on the surface. They're not grazers, they're not bottom feeders. And when they feed, they hyperextend their mouth to form like a tube to suck in food that is floating on the water. So you will notice very often that your Anthias don't pick up any food when they drop on the sand bed. They only feed it when it's in the water. And that's why flow is very important, to keep it suspended so they can start feeding on it. And so I'll show you another video of an Anthias feeding in very slow motion. And you can see exactly what I mean when the mouth hyperextends to suck up food that is floating in the water. So again, I have to shut my PowerPoint off for a while. Okay, this is a slow motion video of a Studentis comipenis feeding on a small fish. Okay, notice how the jaw hyperextends into a tube and suck the food in. So this kind of mouth and this kind of feeding pattern is not suited for picking food on the floor or grazing on algae growing on the rocks. And that is why the size of your food and the flow is very important to make sure that they eat well. All right. So the last aspect is flow. So flow is actually very, very important for Anthias. Not only does it affect feeding, it also affects overall health and well-being. So you can see, they're highly dependent on flow. A lot of them, not all of them, are found in very high flow areas. So you watch a lot of documentaries. If you go diving, you notice that a lot of Studentias, they swim at the surface of the reef, near the reef crest, where corals are very abundant and the flow there is really strong. They like to ride the currents and they swim against the flow. And they have a very interesting behavior of swimming. They are constantly moving their bodies, swimming against flow, but they don't gain any distance. They remain stationary. So they're swimming against the current and they're expending a lot of energy, but they don't move anywhere. They just stay in position and they pick up food as it passes by. So oftentimes, when there's no flow, there is no feeding. Put an Anthias in a tank with no water movement and drop food in, they don't recognize it as food. They don't eat it. But the minute you start circulating the tank, circulating the water, and the food is moving along with the current, then it starts enticing a feeding response. But it's also important to provide an area of slack current because they need to rest as well, and they can't be swimming all day long, right? So you need to provide some areas of the tank where the flow is not too strong, where they can go and rest. And like I said before, this is not for all species of Anthias. Some, especially the deep water ones, they're not very accustomed to high flow, like Studentis ventralis, for example. They like swimming in current-prone areas, but not heavy bashing current. So again, another video. Sorry, it's too many videos. But this video is actually, this comes from my tank, from my aquarium at home, showing you exactly the kind of swimming style that I was describing before. Stationary swimming, in position, not gaining much in terms of distance, but expending a lot of energy. So look, notice how they're swimming, spending a lot of energy moving their bodies, but they're not really gaining much in distance. The current is blowing against them and they're just maintaining their position. Sorry. Product placement. And notice how they're opening their mouth, picking food as they pass by. So you can imagine if you're a little fish like this, and you spend your whole day just, shaking your body, swimming against the current, not gaining much in distance. I mean, this side of my tank is only 2 feet in length, but already they're swimming so much, picking up food in the current. So flow is very important for them to move, to eat, to mingle with other fishes. So actually, this is a new species of Anthias, which I will talk more about in the next few slides. But yeah, see, notice how they're picking food in the water when they're moving. And that is why frequent feedings in small amount is very important, because they expend a lot of energy, they have a very high metabolic rate, they need to eat a lot. And there's just really, a lot of effort and energy goes into being an Anthias. Okay. So previously I was mentioning there were 3 subgenus of Anthias: Franzia, Myrolabrictis, and Studentias sensu stricto. So I'll be touching more on Myrolabrictis, which most of our Anthias come from. So how do we differentiate this subgenus from the others? They have a very strong protuberance on the upper lip. They have like a little, how do you explain it, like a shovel nose. So that's the determining factor for this subgenus. And most of our favorite species, the most beautiful ones, come from here. And there is one, Studentias CF aurolentus, that is highlighted in red, that is potentially new from the Coral Sea. There's work to be done on it. So I'll just be showing you a little bit more about it in the next few slides. So this is just a hypothesized phylogram on Myrolabrictis. And what a phylogram is, it tells you, it's basically, in very layman words, a tree to show you where they all sit evolutionary and where they are most, who is more closely related to who. So for example, this first bracket is Studentias ignitus and Studentias dispar. They sit on the same branch, so they're like sisters for each other. Ignitus is the Indian Ocean representative of dispar. All right, so the one that we'll be paying close attention to is the one on the extreme bottom, the aurolentus complex. So there are 2 distinct branches and one main big complex of this subdivision of Myrolabrictis, and the one that we'll be discussing in will be here. And you'll notice in the next few slides that all the species in this branch of the phylogram are all very similar looking. So you can tell that they're all actually very closely related to each other on this tree, evolutionary. So the Lowry complex, or whatever you want to call it, Flavoguttatus complex as well. So we have 6 species in this complex, all of them looking rather similar. The one that is new is this one, F. So you can see actually on the first row we have Studentias aurolentus, Studentias, it's an undescribed species, found in New Caledonia, and C, Flavoguttatus. Basically, all these species, they're found in different ranges of the ocean. So when we talk about evolution of fish or reef fishes, how do you explain this in? Okay, so you imagine the ocean is like this, right? And all these sister species, you can call them sister species. They're all related to each other, but not genetically distinct. They're genetically distinct. So they're all found in separate, isolated areas of the ocean. And allopatric speciation, meaning, for example, you have a population of Anthias A in this area, and maybe a few thousand years ago, a mountain range emerged in the middle, or some kind of barrier prevented, split up the 2 species. So now population A is now A and B because of this mountain range in the middle, for example. And over many, many thousands of years, one of this isolated group started evolving and speciating on its own to form a distinct species, but originating from the same ancestor. So most of these follow the same theory of speciation, allopatric speciation, and F is the newest member for this complex found in the Coral Sea. And the Coral Sea is actually a very unique biogeography area. It's found near Australia and Vanuatu and New Caledonia. And it's, a lot of species over there are endemic and found nowhere else. And it's because of this isolated range that species start evolving from their ancestors and start becoming different. And so this is the newest one from there. Just more pictures of it. I mean, currently we're not me, but scientists are studying its genetic and composition and how it relates to the other members, and eventually it might get a name, it might get a new name, but currently it's listed as Studentus CF aurolentus, and CF just means to confer with whatever species that it looks closest to it. So it looks like aurolentus, but it's not really aurolentus, so it just put there Studentus CF aurolentus to confer with the preceding species. I don't think I have any more slides, so small pictures of it. So it's not really clear from this picture, but there is a little blunt tip on the upper lip. It's actually very evident in certain species, like Studentus tuca, for example. You can see like a duck lip, and that's why it's Myrolabrictis. And yeah, actually I have no more slides. So in summary, it's just how to keep them, flow, feeding, types of food, types of tank mates that you keep them in, and just a little bit of the new species from the Coral Sea. Yeah. Thank you very much. Any questions you can ask me now, or yeah?
I have a question about aggression.
Yes.
I've tried a couple of different types of these smaller Anthias, and for example, I tried a group of Smithsonian ones with the small females and sub-mature animals. Have you any experience how to do to avoid aggression in between the small females and the young ones, just to be able to keep them alive for a longer, to get them strong enough?
Right. So the issue here is you have very, very small juveniles and mid-sized females or sub-males. So because these fish are very, they have their own complex caste system.
Yeah.
When you add them all in, they will spend the first few days and weeks sorting out the position of the ranking. So the most aggressive one will be telling whoever in the group, I'm the one in charge, and so on and so forth. So you notice when you first add all your Anthias in, the first week especially, they'll start fighting amongst each other to develop their own social system to see who is boss and who is not. And after like 1 week or 2 weeks, the aggression will subside a little bit. But the main factor is they need to survive this initial period. Yes. So what you need to do, what I find is better is if you start with all the same sizes. Because if you have really small ones and really big ones, the small ones may not be able to handle. They're not necessarily trying to kill each other. They're just trying to sort out who is on top and who is below. And in the process, some of them might die, some of them might get injured. So try to start all with the same size. If you want to start with very small ones, get all really small ones and then let them grow together as a unit. If you want to get medium-sized ones, get all medium-sized and then let them grow as a unit. So what people normally do is they get maybe 4 or 5 females, and then over time, one of the females will become male, and then the male will take care of the rest on its own. And also, the bigger your tank, the better, because the bigger your aquarium, the more space that they can go around, and the aggression will subside. That's it. Yeah.
And that's a problem in Sweden. It's very difficult to find more than a couple of them every time. So sometimes it's easier to buy one fish, but that's kind of boring.
I know. It's difficult because for me, I come from Singapore, and it's very near places like Bali and Philippines and the other Indo-Pacific islands. And so we get fish like that every week. We get like hundreds of Anthias, hundreds of butterfly fish, hundreds of everything. And for us, it's really, really easy, and we take for granted this blessing. So if I want to buy like an Anthias, I just go to the wholesaler and I can find like hundreds of Dispar, hundreds of Smith Van Easy.
Okay, now the hate you.
I'm not trying to stir any issues. But I get what you're trying to say, that it's not easy for you to find a group, because like maybe you get to see like 1 or 2 in the store, and then by the time you buy it and then you wait like a couple of months later, and then so it's that is something that is not
You don't mind the tricks.
I don't know how to help you with that, but yeah.
Is it possible to trick them? If you have a couple, if you put them out in another aquarium and then put 4 together again, if you have 2 new, and
you can try that, but every time you pick them out, and then you put a new one, they will have to reshuffle their, because they're very, very social fish. And every single you have to think of your group as a unit. It's like a battalion or a platoon, for example. Every single fish in that group has its placing. Every single fish in that group has, I wouldn't say a role to play, but they have their own caste system. Yeah. So every time you remove something and you put one in again, they will recognize the difference and they'll have to sort everything out again.
I thought if every one of them is new, it's easier for the group to fix it.
I've never done it before. I've never tried it before. You can try it. Yeah. Yeah.
Do you know anything about the natural life expectancy of them? Because they have such high metabolism, you would expect that they won't live for that long?
Right.
Do you have any experience regarding that?
Well, I personally haven't been keeping, I think the longest I've ever kept an aquarium is like 11 years. I turned 23 this year, so if I kept anything longer than that, I'll be still, you know. But I have heard of Studentias, for example, Tuca, purple queen Anthias, which is notoriously difficult. I have a picture of it here. So the purple one, what happened? Alright, so this is Studentias Tuca, and it's notoriously difficult to keep in aquariums. But Matt Wandel at the California Academy of Science has one that is well above 10 years, maybe. There is a sister for this, Studentias pascalis. In the Omaha Zoo, they have some that are, you know, well over like 4 or 5 years. So I don't exactly know how long they live in the wild or how long they can live in captivity maximum, but they can, given the right care, feeding regimes and husbandry, live for a substantial amount of time. And yeah, here you can see the real duck lip on the upper lip, the myrolabrictis feature for this. Tuca is a very good example for it. So yeah, I don't know exactly how long they can live, but they can live for a long time if you keep them well. Any other questions?
I have one more, that's
Yeah,
okay. Have you any experience with friends who have tried with the lamellar flow in the tanks for them? Have you seen any positive effects on that? If you have laminar flow that's go the same direction.
Can I answer that?
Yes, please. I was about to say that it's not an SPS in the
I have laminar flow, and it's really good. It's really a difference. You know, they come into the you know, really into the current and wait for the food. Yeah. They even beg for the food in this current. They love it. You know, it is about, it's not turning like that. You know, it's really pressing. This pressing, really, they like it. I need to say, you know, my Anthias love it. So sorry.
Yeah, but it's a good answer. I mean, a lot of people, they don't realize how much flow is a factor for keeping Anthias. A lot of people just think of them as normal, regular fish, but flow is actually really, really important. You can see the video that I showed you just now of them swimming against the current. They spend a lot of time in the aquarium swimming like this against the current, waiting for food to come. And if you just try it at home, turn off all the pumps in your tank, turn off all the wave maker, turn off all the make the tank as still as possible. You put food in, they might eat it, but it won't incite a response the same way as with flow. It's really, really important. It's almost like a coral, almost.
It's almost so you cannot use SPS in an Anthias tank. Almost it would be nice.
And that is why, and that is why students do very well in SPS tank because of the high flow. But then again, the feeding is another important thing. You need to feed them a lot. And people who keep them in very heavily stocked SPS tanks, they try not to feed them too much. So you have to strike a balance. Yes.
Yeah, talking about feeding, do you employ like a feeding machine, or do you?
You can employ an auto feeder. So personally, I don't. I try to feed my Anthias minimum 2 times a day.
By hand?
Three or more maximum. Yeah, by hand. If I'm not at home, I get like whoever's at home to help me feed it. But you can employ an auto feeder. Matt Wandel at the Steinhardt Aquarium. I'm advertising his name. I don't know why. He has because he keeps his Studentias in a non-photosynthetic coral tank, and so that is another good way of keeping Anthias. Keep them in a tank full of non-photosynthetic corals that requires regular feeding, and in that manner, you know, you inevitably have to feed your corals, and the Anthias get to feed as well. So what you can do is take a little container, put it in an ice box or a thermal flask, keep it cold for like you just need to keep it cold for a day. Mix it maybe seawater, put like maybe Artemia, Cyclopes, mysis, and phytoplankton and whatever, like a slushy, like a slurry of suspended particles, and then attach it to a peristaltic pump, and then turn it on and then let it drip over a few minutes throughout the day. So your Anthias get to feed little small feedings during the entire day, and that's a very good way of keeping Anthias, but it will severely compromise your water quality if you're feeding it this way and you're keeping corals. So a good way is to keep it with non-photosynthetic corals like sun corals and sea fans and sponges and whatnot, and then you see that they do really, really well. Yes?
Some Anthias are notorious for all turning male in a tank, like Carberry, I think, is a good example of this. And it's a nice Anthias, it's small and good looking, but do you have any tips for not, some tricks of the trade to not get them all to turn male and kill each other?
Actually, that is a very common problem, not only in Anthias but also in Cirrilabris. So there are a lot of fish and a lot of marine fishes are protogynous hermaphrodites. That means they change sex. So what you're saying is not very uncommon. Like for example, there's a fairy wrasse, Cirrilabris jordanine, the flame wrasse from Hawaii, is also very notorious for changing sex. You can get two females together, and one of them will be male, but the minute the male is weak, or this other female senses that the male is sick, she will quickly take advantage of the situation and become males, and then soon you have two males, and then they'll start killing each other. So I really, have no idea why this is happening. Why, I think maybe some species are just more aggressive than other species. They're just more inclined to be dominant. And in a small tank, in an enclosed area, every single female wants to be a male. And they're always, on the precipice of changing. It takes very little suppression for them to change. So the minute one of the male is like slacking off, or feeling sick or I don't know, just not being as aggressive, then the female will start to change. And then once this female changes to another male, they start fighting each other and they don't spend enough time keeping the other females in check, and then slowly start one by one, they'll start changing sex again. And then you have like a chain reaction. Every female wants to become male, and as soon as the males are preoccupied killing each other, the females take this chance to, and then you have all of this problem.
So basically you have to leave those fish in the sea instead of taking
Well,
them
you
to the
can,
tank.
you can try mixing them, if you really like Carberry Anthias, you can try mixing them with other species, like Bartlett Anthias is another one. Studentus ballatorum is also quite aggressive. So what I would encourage you is maybe keep a big group of not so aggressive Anthias, and then maybe put one or two of them in, and then just watch them, interact with each other. Maybe then they won't change so much, yeah.
All right. Yes, just of curiosity, do you work together with scientists, or
Sorry?
do you work together with scientists? I mean, you were referring to a lot of scientific work, and or are you just very interested yourself in?
Well, I would not consider myself a scientist. No. I'm just a hobbyist like a lot of you, but I have friends and contacts who are scientists as well.
Yeah.
And that is where, Isan was saying previously, I think somebody asked a question. Where do you draw the line between scientists and hobbyists in this hobby? You don't have to be a scientist to be a hobbyist. You don't have to be a hobbyist to be a scientist. You can be a hobbyist with a very strong interest in science, and then if you have friends who are doing research work, you can help them with it. So currently I'm not a scientist yet, but when we get species like the Anthias from the Coral Sea, for example, because scientists a lot of times they spend their lives, I won't say they spend their life, but they spend more time in the lab than they do in the field. So a lot of times hobbyists like us, we get to see more fish that they don't. We get to see more fish that comes in the aquarium trade and they don't. And a lot of fish actually were described based on specimens that come in the trade and not from the wild. So in this area we can help them as well. Like when we see something new or potentially new, we take a picture, we send it to them and ask them, do you think this is new? And they'll be like, yeah, I think it's new. And then we start sending samples and you start helping them with it, and then it gets described. A lot of fish actually are described from my friends who work in fish stores. Jason Edward, for example, in Greenwich Aquarium, recently had his name, name after a fish was named after him, and it's just, a hobbyist working in a fish store. And now he has a Pseudogeloides named after him, Pseudogeloides edwardi, because he was working in the store and he noticed something is a little bit different, and then brought it to attention of the scientists. And so in this way you can, have the wrong job when you want to fish also.
And I agree completely. You're contributing to science.
Yeah,
in that way, you're a scientist. Yeah, right.
Not a scientist.
No, in one way. Any more questions? You're also a writer for Reef Builders magazine?
Yeah, I'm editor for Reef Builders. I mostly do fish stories, like articles.
Yeah, right. About Anthias or?
Just in general, like if there's a new discovery of fish, or just like sometimes, it really depends on what I feel like writing on that particular day. I do have some articles in a few magazines and stuff like that, but yeah, it's mostly just.
Yeah, I'm reading all your articles on reef builders, and I'm following you there. So, and I especially like the ones where you visit all these crazy fish collectors in Japan and everywhere you go. What's the most special fish you've seen in this? You have seen the peppermint angel.
I've seen
for real, right?
so many times that it doesn't even.
So many times. Okay.
It doesn't. You know, there's for me, a lot of people have this misconception that when somebody likes a rare fish, they only go after it for its rarity or for its money. I personally don't. I like a fish based on its story. So like you can show me a picture of a really small, ugly brown fish and I'll be even more excited about that than the peppermint angel. Actually, there's a really funny story about this. When the peppermint angel was first collected by Rufus Kimura in the Southern Pacific, he uploaded a picture of a little box with like, I think 12 peppermint angels in it. And at the corner of the box, there was this really, really small little chromis that is light blue in color. If you want, I could show you a picture of it after. It's a light blue chromis. Yeah, the deep water chromis. And when I saw that picture, I freaked out immediately at the small little ugly chromis, and I sent Rufus an email. I said, I need that fish immediately. And he's like, I'm sorry, the peppermint angels also. I'm not talking about the peppermint angels. I'm talking about that ugly little chromis. And because it's brand new to science, and I've seen the fish in a video that Richard Powell uploaded on YouTube, so I recognize that fish from somewhere. So it all depends on you, what excites you the most. And for some people, it's based on factors like high cost or rarity, but for me, it's just the story of the fish. I think somebody here had another question.
But you said if it gets two mates, it will get chaos and it brings more mates. Right. Then the best thing it would be that if you get two, take one of them out away, so it's only it.
Right.
So it's just one mate.
Right. So you can keep more than one males. I'm not saying you cannot. And I get what you mean when the males are fighting, you can just remove one. So there is for every species, there is a kind of like a ratio of males to females. So for example, Studentus tuca, I think I read an article about it somewhere. In the Red Sea, it's like one male per every 9 or 13 females, for example. The females outnumber the males a lot. So if you want to keep more than one male, you need to have a lot of females. And in a home aquarium, for hobbyists like us, it's not really possible. If you own a big public aquarium, yeah, you can put in like 5 males and then 25 or 30 females. And it doesn't exactly have to follow the format, the ratio, the numbers. You can play around with it. You can have a few, maybe one male per every 3 females. That's what I do at home. I have like one male, 1 female, 1 male, 2 females, 1 male, 3 females example. You don't have to follow the number exactly. Just play by ear. If you see the males being aggressive to each other, then yeah, like what you say, remove one male, and then start again with all females. Right? It's a very fluid and dynamic aspect of keeping fish. Again, yeah.
Yeah, so you mentioned it was quite easy to access them from the vendors, for example. Are the prices very different at your place as well?
I don't want to make any more enemies.
Yeah, you're right. I don't know you anymore. I go drinking with them all and you just go home to Singapore.
Yeah. So one of the main perks for living in the Indo-Pacific region is that fish are not only very common, they are also really, really, really cheap. Because we get, for example, some of the stores that I go to, wholesalers, they get fish directly from source, as in it comes directly from Bali, for example, or directly from the Philippines. And the chain of custody, as you know, the more chain of custody the fish go through, the more expensive it becomes. And so we get them, I won't say it's representative of all the stores in Singapore, but a good number of them. And I hope that they're not listening to this because they might increase the price when I get back home.
They might. It will be on the web.
So you can just censor this part out maybe. So we get fish directly from the Philippines and from Bali, for example. And not only do we get access to a whole spectrum of fish that wholesalers sieve out on the way, we get everything, and we get them also really cheap. So for example, Smith Barnese Princess Anthias will cost like 12 bucks, 12 Singapore dollars. Yeah.
Don't mention the prices now.
So I don't want to mention the price.
Sorry for raising the question.
Yeah.
But yeah, we get them cheap. And there's another good thing because we get so many fish directly from source, and it doesn't get filtered out among the wholesalers. It's one of my part-time hobby to go down to the wholesalers and look through, just hundreds of fish, and then inevitably you might find something that is caught by accident or shipped by accident or something that is new, and that is where science meets hobby. Find something new, take a picture, send it to your friends, and then you can describe it.
So there are a lot of questions.
One more question, sorry.
2 more questions and then we finish, I think.
The freight cost of an Anthias up here is around $10. Can be $9 to $10. The freight cost.
Yeah, the fish itself is cheap.
Yeah.
The freight is cheap. The fish itself is cheap. I've been to wholesalers. I've seen the cost price of the stock list. It's ridiculous how worthless and valueless a fish is. It's crazy. And I've been catching fish in Hawaii. I've been, I've always like, this fish is rubbish. I don't want it. But then when you go and catch it yourself and you realize how extremely difficult and challenging it is to catch a fish, then you ask yourself, how can this fish that requires so much effort, have to go on a boat, have to wear, like a diving suit, catch it, look like an idiot with a net, like a fool, and it costs like 25 cents on the stock list. How does it happen? I have no idea. So yeah, the fish itself is cheap. It's the cost of shipping, freight, and the compounded markup value throughout the chain of custody that makes the fish expensive.
All right, so thank you very much, Lemon, for coming here and talking. Very interesting. Thank you. As always, also a gift for you. Thank you very much, and you will stick around later on in the aquarium. And now it's time for the next part of the day. Down in the aquarium, in the backstage, looking at the corals, changing corals. Alla kan gå ner nu till akvariet, så är David och de andra där nere och förberett nästa steg.